I like the conversation that we just had because so Leo is sort of a
Yo Chan. Yeah.
yeah, Liu Chen. He is he's one of those people. I mean, he fits. I mean, it was kind of odd, really, because he talks about imposter syndrome, being out of his swim lane, like a lot of these creatives. But so for us in this podcast, he fits right in.
He fits
So,
right in.
which makes no sense because he shouldn't fit in because that's his strength is your
Mhm.
lateral thinking, right? So lateral thinking, that's what we're
Or so associative.
associative thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So which and we haven't talked about this because yeah, because there were so many other things to talk about. But he also mentioned being an introvert,
Hmm.
right? And that associative thinking and introverts, there's a connection there too.
Oh,
Yes. Introverts are better at associative thinking.
I
In
never realized.
general, generalizing, obviously generalizing, but still there's evidence saying that introverts are better at that
That makes
because we are smarter.
sense, but I see it. We're smarter. Is
We're
that what you
just
said?
we're smarter than those extroverts.
Oh,
Yes.
we have more
Yes.
time to think, that's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're in the corner thinking
Thinking. They've been
whenever
talking,
while
thinking.
the extroverts are having a party. We're like, we are thinking.
I can't come tonight. I'm busy thinking.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Sounds
yeah.
sad, but it's usually often the truth. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Well, yeah, the world of introverts, you know, basically, uh, also, they can look like extroverts because they're on stage and
Yeah.
they can look like extroverts, but they are not, and it's complicated, right? So,
Yeah.
and then there's also obviously there's a sort of a, there's a sort of what's that, a spectrum, a scale.
Ah, yeah.
We're
You have
not all the
ambivert.
same, right? You can be
Yeah.
both, and it depends on context, and it depends on because you
Yeah.
can be an introvert and an extrovert in a different situation. So it's nothing's that like black and white, right? There's always
Yeah.
a lot of shades of gray. But it's interesting that he mentioned that because we were talking about creative leadership, and I think creative leadership and empathy
Yes.
and yeah, seeing things from different angles, and I think that's really important. And I
Hmm.
think and maybe introverts or people who don't feel they fit in, or whatever we call it, there's something there. Neurospicy, there was a word that's been used not in this podcast but in
Hmm.
previous podcasts. So there's different languages and words to kind of try to kind of describe people who are creatives, creative thinkers, or people who try to kind of or associative thinkers, or
Hmm.
yeah, it's yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's interesting because that was one of the first things that I noticed about him was, we always ask the same question, right? Who are you? And immediately off the bat, he starts talking about helping people and making an impact on lives. And you can tell that the empathy is very strong, yeah, element for him. And yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to say too much because because he shared such an amazing story,
Yes.
which I'm not gonna. No, we're
No,
not
I'm
gonna
not
talk
going to
about that
spoil it.
because
No.
so yeah, we're gonna spoil. Otherwise, we'll spoil it. He has to tell that story because it's so powerful. Yeah, so I don't know. I think people should just listen to the interview. Yeah. So how are you doing, Morgan?
How am I doing? I've been I've been holding this weird space between like I wouldn't call it dread, but like a lot of existential questions are floating around in my head. Like what's the purpose of anything?
Ah,
Or what's going to happen with the state of the world? Um and
how
it
come?
Uh, well, the current state of events is making me ask bigger questions.
Mm,
There's also um, I think there's been some like medical changes for me, which is of course
mm,
part of the situation. But I don't feel anxiety around it, which is of course a relief because sometimes when you have these existential questions, there's a lot of anxiety. But
mm,
so it's been like a peaceful existential crisis. But at the same time, well, I wouldn't call it a crisis. I wouldn't call it a crisis, but asking these bigger questions. But at the same time, I, you also still have to get together with your friends and make your lunch for the day and remember to pay your taxes. So I'm swinging between like asking these huge life questions that I'll never get a concrete answer to, but then also having to remember to do these small, not mundane things, but small human everyday
mm.
things. And so I'm kind of like caught in this pendulum of, okay, what's the point of eating lunch if everyone's going to eventually die? Like, where I've been
Mm,
caught lately. Yeah. So it's a weird, I
yeah.
won't say weird, but just a very interesting headspace I haven't experienced before. Because usually when I've had like an existential crisis in the past, it's been a true crisis. There's been maybe more anxiety, and I've been only in that existential space where now I'm really swinging. So during the course of a day, I can be thinking both of these types of things. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm so excited to catch up with Arne and chat with our guests because these always bring me a lot of inspiration. But also, like, will I still even have a job in 10 years? Like,
Yeah, so maybe it's because I think you're probably not the only one,
hope not.
because we're in in a time where there are big changes happening,
Hmm.
but they're
Hmm.
not in your control. So they're not personal,
No.
right? They're not about, these are not things that, you have no control over them, but they are going to affect things around you,
Yeah.
they can be things you care about, or you are worried about or angry about, or what stuff's happening.
Hmm.
Yeah, I kind of I think it's true, and there's a lot going on at the same time as
Yeah.
well, right? So it's I think that's a time for those kind of questions to be asked,
Yeah.
not about lunch or death. It's like, like, do we have lunch or are we going to die? Maybe not
What's it going to be today?
today. No, let's have lunch first. Um, right. So yeah, but yeah. I think a lot of people will have that kind of sense of, because we didn't record that, but this kind of thing that kind of everything's kind of connected to everything. So when
Yes.
something's happening somewhere, and it's so big, it affects you, right? You
Hmm.
feel it. It's things are kind of happening, and it's in the air. Something's happening, and it makes you kind of
Yeah.
wonder about where are you, and why does it? How can we make it? How can we? How can we make sense of it?
Hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
a lot of what's happening is so senseless, meaningless, or
Yeah.
kind of there's no point to it. It's just right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So that's how I am.
All right.
And you,
Sorry, I
anything?
asked.
Nah.
Okay. Well, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm similar. It's mundane things. It's having sort of so my daughter's traveling,
Mhm.
which is also kind of an interesting moment where I miss her, and but I'm also proud of her.
Yeah. Is this
But
the longest she's been away from home now, or was?
yeah, this is going to be the longest. I mean, she's been away for 2 months to Asia, then she came back, and now she's going to be away for 4 months. And this is the second week. And so kind of, it's like, man, that's a long time,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
we're getting used to it, that's probably the weirdest part, where you go like, huh. I tend to, so, I mean, she's 18. When she was, before she started traveling, she would be out for, especially in the weekends. And
Yeah.
so I would leave the light on when I go to bed. And now we're like, oh, no, I don't have to leave the light on. And I'll still, I still, when we have dinner, I still grab like, 4 knives and forks, and, like, oh no, three,
Yeah.
because my son
Yeah.
right? So little thing, little automatic things that just kind of go like, oh no, no, of course not. No, she's
Yeah.
Barcelona, you know. And so that's kind of, yeah. And then we have, my son is at home. Obviously, he's only
Mhm.
13, becoming a teenager, and
Yeah.
which is also sometimes, wow, yeah, wow.
Yeah.
He can be, yeah, a teenager. Yes. And we go like, oh no. Oh boy.
Is and of course every kid is very different, and then you also have the sometimes like the gender differences, right? Like
Yeah, for
but
sure.
how is are you so his when he's showing signs of reminding you that he's really a teenager, is it similar or different to than your
Um,
with your
it's
daughter?
different. I think there's a difference, but it's also not that different. It is about if you are, you know, it starts when you're like 13, 12, 13. Then, first of all, you as a parent, you're kind of done. Your friends take over. The friends
Yeah.
and this
Yep.
the context is, the things he sees on YouTube and his friends. So his hairstyle, for instance, like
No longer dictated by
he's
you
like,
guys.
yeah,
That's for
you're like, oh, why? Yeah, what's going on with the hair? And yeah, you're like, oh, wait a minute, it's the style of whatever he's watching on YouTube or these
hmm
influencers,
hmm
and so that's happening. So you don't have that much influence anymore. And the other thing is that they're trying to find sort of the boundaries, right? And then as a parent, you go like, oh no, I have to you go like, this is a boundary right here, and how do I do that? And I don't. So you get into arguments that we never had before. You're
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. You're like, oh no, and I don't want that.
You haven't done
So
that before. Now we have to talk.
yeah, where's my little boy?
Aw.
Like,
But and that kind of reminds me of what something we talked about with Leo is that the AI is never going to be human.
exactly,
So it's also never going to carry those human scars. And so
exactly, yeah,
and human scars, right? We make silly decisions when we're teenagers, or maybe brilliant decisions, or or pushing those boundaries. That's where
yeah.
we also learn things. And so then I'm like, okay, if one of my valuable traits is that I'm coming in with scars, I need to be doing more stuff that can scar me.
No, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the word scar, but like I'm not sure. I don't. That's not what I
Lived
want to.
experiences. I need to be okay.
No, but you're right. You're right. I mean, there are these experiences that will kind of stay with you, or they shape you, and yeah, and AI does not have those experiences. There's no lived experience at all. It can kind of replicate it because it kind
Mhm.
of learned from whatever you feed it, but it's not real, so it's not the same, and it's not interesting either. When AI goes like, "I was hurt when I was a kid," you have never been a kid, so I
You
don't
know
care.
nothing about.
You don't know. Yeah, exactly. We don't care. No, but right. So yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. AI being a teenager. That's really annoying. I want to have a teenage AI robot. Yes. It'd be so annoying, but interesting. No, but being a parent, being a kid, growing up, having experiences, fighting for the things you believe in, or at least, so my father would always want to kind of correct me because when I said something that was wrong, and I
Mhm.
was probably wrong, he would kind of says, "Oh, we'll look it up." And it was so annoying. I would say something like, "No, something about history," and he goes, "Look, I don't think that's right." And I'm like, "That is right." Let's take no, no. And then obviously there was no internet at the time, but he would go and encyclopedia. I would take up the
Yeah.
encyclopedia. I was like so annoying. He would look it up in the encyclopedia, and I would walk away. Like, I'm right, and don't prove me wrong,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
So I try not to be that parent, but I am obviously, because that's the other thing. You learn you're like your parents. You learn from your parents. You go, don't do that, don't do that. But I'm still like, but I think he's wrong.
We should look it up.
Let him go. Okay, yeah, but yes. everything is connected to everything. Everything's related, and we talk about this, right? We talk about growing up with Leo,
Yeah.
and he is as a kid, and this sort of the television series he watched, the Star Trek that
Yeah.
influenced him. You know, yeah, and it made me think what influenced me when I was a kid watching.
Ooh.
So,
You know, the first thought that just popped in my mind, I don't know if they were big in Europe, but there were these two twins called Mary Kate and Ashley. And they were famous because they were like child actors. So they were in a sitcom, and so everybody knew who these two girls were, Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. But then as they grew up, and like they were in the sitcom as babies, so they really grew up on screen. And but then as they started to become, I don't know, like 5 or 6, they started to become their own brand. Mary Kate and Ashley, Mary Kate and Ashley. And they would come out with videos, and every video kind of had a different theme. So one video would be them being detectives, or one video would be them being cowboys. And even as they got older, I think they were still making movies up until right before they went to university. But then they would always be living these different lives. And I that just flashed to me. I think that was very formative
mm.
for me because I always like looked up to them because they were a few years older than me. Like, oh, they're so cool. I want to be a twin. I want to live all these different lives.
Oh, right. I'm afraid I grew up with Monty Python. Monty Python was the my those were my heroes. Yeah, and my dad hated them because I was watching sort of one of their movies, and
Yeah.
he'd go like, "That's horrible." Like you're not even watching. You're reading the newspaper and complaining about Monty Python. And anyway, but that was my yeah. I'm afraid so. Yeah. We have to listen to Leo, and we want to listen to Leo, and
Yes,
because he's going to share amazing story that will kind of stay with you.
definitely.
Yeah, right. It's going to stay with me. The power of storytelling, by the way, he
Yeah,
exhibits.
nailed it.
Yeah, totally. Okay,
Enjoy.
enjoy.
I am someone that deeply cares about others. I I want to make an impact on people because I realized over my journeys as a human and as a professional that helping people do things that perhaps they don't see in themselves or equip things in themselves makes everyone better, and it brings me the most joy to do that. Because I think I've been in, I guess, situations in my life where I've had people pour into me, and that's made everything, like the difference to me in professional, personal, whatever it is. And so that drives me. I am a husband to my beloved wife. Her name is Anne. She's the love of my life, so I always like to talk about her and everything that I
Oh,
do. And yeah, I'll go with that. I'm a dreamer. I grew up watching Star Trek as a kid, and I think it has everything to do with what I do now.
Star Trek
Yep,
Star Trek.
Star
Are you
Trek.
are
has
you
everything to
are
do.
you are you a captain of a spacecraft?
I watched The Next Generation growing up, and I think
Yeah.
it inspired me to believe that anything is possible.
Wow.
Just because, I mean, it opens with we're boldly going where no one has gone before. It's just a
Yeah.
motivational
Interesting.
intro to any, and I watched it all the time. Like I know all the episodes, and they had technology that was super cool that wasn't invented, like the holodeck, which
Yeah. Yeah.
generated basically any environment you wanted, or replicators that can make any food on demand. I'm like, who doesn't want any of those products today? I would
Well,
certainly
yeah.
want those things.
Well,
So
you're gonna get it. It's
I think so. We're
yeah,
getting there. We're
definitely.
getting there.
Oh yeah, lots of stuff from Star Trek has become reality, and it's interesting. I actually introduced my son to Star Trek. He's 13, and
Okay.
he was sort of already quite into Star Wars,
Yes.
and so I now I introduced him to Star Trek, which is really interesting because he was like, oh, it's also like in space and things, and what's the difference? But it's like, it's more science based. It's more,
Yes.
whereas Star Wars is more about wizardry and magic and all these powers. But then yeah, it's really interesting how that and it's also that the inventions they make they so now if you look at the early episodes, I mean, it's really interesting, right? That it's, and I do believe that, and I think that I'm not sure. I think I actually read about this, but that if innovations and inventors, they are being kind of these kind of stories and sci-fi and also books and all, they are inspiration to
Yeah.
innovators and inventors, right? So it is, and we didn't record that, Morgan, but you're Imagineering masters. You're the master of Imagineering.
Yes, you are.
Yes, you are.
Imagination. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, that's what it is, right? It is that kind of you're using your imagination, and if whether you make a movie or you write a book about it, but it is still, it's no different than innovators,
Yeah.
imagining future scenarios and possibilities, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think everything has to do with what we believe that could be possible. And I think as adults, some of us have that, but a lot of us have had it maybe knocked out of us, or our imagination has grown dim. And I honestly don't know why. I think I really do attribute it to Star Trek growing up, because I always believed that you can do anything you want, or if you don't know how to do it, I grew up with the internet, when it was still in its infancy, and what I loved about it was people would just share online, hey, I've done this, I figured this out. So even if I didn't know how to do something, I always believed that someone on the internet posted it somewhere for free, and you could probably learn from them or get their help. And that has fueled my journey. I started in graphic design, but now as an innovation guy, that's still the same mindset that I have, that things are possible, and we just need to have the audacity to dream it and pursue after it and go after it. So I think a lot of the work that I do now is inspiring people to dream and have imagination and believe in the possibilities that could be.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And when you're inspiring people to dream, are you inspiring people that are already more creatively minded, or are you usually then kind of bringing to creativity to people with less, yeah,
I
creativity in their day
Yeah,
job?
that's a great question. I find joy in both. I never try to, I guess, convince people, but I believe everyone is innately creative. And I mean, I speak about that. I think we all have that. And I think in my career, I've always felt very blessed to work in a field that aligns with my skill set and my passion. And I have met people that don't have that same liberty. They are in, they're very creative, but they're in less creative roles, and I've just been fortunate that for the large majority of my career, there's been an alignment. And so when I find people that don't have that alignment, it's not that I feel bad for them, but I'm like, that's difficult, because I was a business analyst in one part of my career, and that's not the most, let's just say, the most creative, innovative position, but I found joy in the relationships that I held.
Mhm.
And I knew it would. I'm not a numbers person, so when I have to open Microsoft Excel or look at like numbers, my head hurts. And I remember those days and how challenging it was to be in an environment like that. And I cannot imagine, if you are in a position like that for years or decades, what
Mhm.
that does to that creative spirit in you if it's there. And I believe it is there. It's just that we've perhaps limited the application of it to fine arts, or what we typically see as creativity. But you can be creative in business, you can be creative in finance, you can be creative in all these places. So I think I want to help people unleash what's inside them. I love working with the people that they're already like, yeah, I love thinking differently, and I'm always coming up with ideas. I love enabling that, but I also find the equal amount of joy when I tell people, hey, you've probably innovated in your life and never knew it, because that's how what I realized about myself. I was innovating before I even know what innovation was.
Interesting that you I kind of when you listen to you talk, I kind of all of a sudden I had this image of these creative people being kind of stuck in this, which is, and it kind of sad, really, if you think
Yeah.
about it. We're staring at screens with Excel sheets and going like, oh, you know, but in a way, I mean, I don't know if that's ever been kind of, if there's ever been any research done about that, how many people actually, you know, really, are kind of, I mean, I know there's lots of research showing that people in bigger organizations, most people are not really happy in their job, which is sad enough. But if you, and I actually totally believe that everybody is creative in a way, of course, because how can you go through life? You're a creative problem solver all the time. You have to kind of fix things and manage so many things in your life, right? But then when you go to work, there's I don't know where I read this. It was a book about sort of the first industrial revolution, where it was described as so you're an adult, maybe have a family, you have kids, you have a mortgage, you have to kind of do all these things, and then you go to work, and all of a sudden they treat you as a kid again. You have to, especially in that early days, you
Yeah.
were working in a factory. Sometimes you couldn't even go to the bathroom. You'd have to ask, right? So all of a sudden you did not have any responsibility anymore. Nobody trusted you anymore. But then you go home and you're totally responsible for all these other things. And I was sharing this story I was doing a training at a big bank here in the Netherlands. I was saying that, how weird it was. And someone said, Arne, it's still that way. To a large extent, it's still that way. We still have to clock in. Still, people are watching, and COVID obviously changed that a bit. If we created more awareness of it, like, what are we stuck in? But sort of this being stuck and showing. So my question, again, I talked too much, sorry, but my question is, um, if you are stuck and you have this creativity, and then someone like you comes in and shows them, like, hey, listen, you have all this, this creativity in you, and you can do so much more with that. I can also imagine that is even more frustrating, because the system that you're part of is not changing so that quickly, right? So you might be aware of it, but you go like, yeah, okay, well, what do I do with it? Because, where do I go? So how does that work?
Yeah, two thoughts come to my mind for that. One, I used to work in corporate. I have a lot of years in corporate, and the joy that I had was when I met people like that, I could invite them to join a program I was leading, which was called innovation coaching. And all it was, hey, if you can get your boss's permission to come hang out with me, I will teach you everything I know. So I was an internal resource, of course, and so it was a free program that I led to teach people how to be innovative. And the ask I had at the time was, your boss needs to give you about 20 hours a month. I later increased it to 20 hours a month, but if they say yes, then I will teach you everything I know. And that will be a way for you to kind of have this sort of alter ego, if you will, moonlight as this innovation creative person. And what was interesting on that path was that people started to find more joy doing this new role that I gave them as an innovation coach, than they did their actual job. And they told me that,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, this is incredible. This is unlocking something in people that I don't even think they realized was there. And I started to see innovation as not just, of course we get ROI on the business side of things, but I saw this as life transformation for people, because they were now leaning into the giftings and the passions that they had. And so that was on the one side. And there are also people that I just held innovation events where I would talk innovation stuff, who teach them mindsets, skill sets, all those things, have conversations. And those were open events to all the staff. So even if they weren't part of this official program with me, they would come, they were like followers, right? They would come to all these events. And I remember there was a contractor in the organization, and she was a contractor, so she couldn't officially join the program I was leading. But I remember she emailed me and she's like, "Hey Leo, I'm leaving the organization. I just wanted to let you know." And I said, "Oh, well, what's going on, whatever." And she said, "I got a job in innovation." She said, "I found a startup company. I used to live in Atlanta, Georgia." And she said, "I found a startup." And she's like, "I'm joining it." I'm like, "I'm getting my foot in the door." She's like, "You unlock something." She was in human resources when I met her. And she said, I want to do this innovation thing. And so she told me, "I just want to let you know, because this kind of like changed my path." And the last time I saw her on LinkedIn, she's now at PayPal Ventures, doing innovation work. And I just love that arc of her story, because it was like it unlocked something in her. HR wasn't her thing. She was in it, but she found this whole other career. And I've seen that she's not the only person in which I've seen this multiplied so many times.
Yep.
And when people
Me too.
met, I've met interns, students that were hanging out with us in Georgia, and they're like, "What? I never even knew this innovation like it was a career. How do I kind of navigate through all this?" So I feel like it really unlocks something deep in you, and whether or not you can express it, full time, we'll say, there's always alternate ways to express creativity. And even when I was a graphic designer for a big organization, I always found creative ways. I was doing design work, but I would just love problem solving. So I would always find ways to manifest creativity, even if it wasn't in a visual way. I just love solving problems, and so I was very stubborn to be able to apply these ideas I had into the real world when it often solved business challenges. So I think there's always a way for us to find opportunities, whether or not it's full. I mean, ideally it could be full time, but there's so many ways in which we can apply it.
That's a very personal, but then you're talking about, the person. I totally agree with you, and I've seen this many times as well, where people went through whatever course or training or coaching program that I ran, that they actually, it did kind of gave them sort of an option that they didn't even know was an option. They gave them these kind of new insights, and then they left their job.
Right.
Because and that wasn't always the intention of the client.
Right.
No, wait a minute. But it does kind of, on a personal level. This is why I love coaching and teaching,
Yeah.
because you're kind of making an impact on a person,
Yeah.
right? And you really help them. And it's, yeah, I've done consultancy and projects and all that, but teaching is so much better.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're helping a person, obviously, but you're kind of, but changing the system around a person so they can actually, there is this safe space for them to become more creative. That's it's slightly different kind of, that takes a different approach, right?
Yeah.
Because where
Yeah.
do they go? Because you need to also create kind of companies that kind of keep those people in. Because I mean, okay, what is your vision on this? So we're looking at a sort of, I mean, right now it's kind of a weird world, right? But anyway, companies, if you want to innovate, and the more technology we have to kind of replace sort of people, the more we start relying on really smart people. And we live in a world where we pay people for their thinking, and
Hmm.
not because they're really good at some kind of something repetitive or something. We pay them for their brains.
Yeah.
But then if you have a culture where you're afraid to share what you actually think, that makes no sense. So, and then you leave, especially if you're talented, and because you have a choice. How do we do that? How do we create these environments? I don't know what you're thinking there.
Wow. Yeah.
Can you solve that for us, please? I like to know. I'm going to take notes. All right. What do we do?
Okay, so I have an answer, at least how I've approached it. And I actually just did a TEDx talk on this in January, so it's kind of
Cool.
fresh, but I believe it roots in psychological safety. And Arne, just like you shared, if we have all these great people and organizations that have brilliant ideas, but they can't articulate them because we don't have an environment by which they can share it safely. And it doesn't mean that we greenlight everything that people are doing. But if we are shooting down people's ideas, telling them all the reasons why it worked, or we shouldn't try it because of X, Y, and Z, or because of this, that, and the other, or that's the worst idea we've ever heard, then that the ability for us to innovate completely dies. And I think we as adults can be less intentional about the choices of words and how we treat others when they're in this vulnerable state of sharing, and we don't realize the impact we can make on them for good or for worse.
Mhm.
And I think it's very important for us to realize that how we treat other people matters, because I so in my TED I shared, so when I was a design student, I felt like a complete imposter. I got into art school. I didn't have a fine arts background. I was just this computer guy. Like I said, I grew up with the internet. So I loved playing with computers. And I somehow, because I was playing with the internet, I made websites. And what I found was I enjoyed creating the art for websites, not so much the coding of it, but the art for it. And so it was a long shot for me. I applied for a really prestigious design school here in Canada, and I somehow got in, which like blew my mind. So I already thought I was imposter, but somehow I get in. I thought like I pulled a fast one over everybody and all this stuff. And there was this one particular project where I was so uncertain about how the art that I created, and I think this one we weren't allowed to use any computer, so I was really out of my swim lane. And I had the most scariest professor ever. Like he was very, very serious, like more like a very serious demeanor, kind of frowny face. You know, we have different resting faces, right? So his was a bit on the scary side and all of that. And so I really struggled with this project so badly. I'm like, this is terrible. And we in design, you have this thing called the critique, which is, by the way, terrifying for anyone. I don't think we should do these anymore. We need to re-envision how we do these. But basically, anybody tells you what they think about your stuff, which is terrible. And it comes to mind, I share my work with the class, and then my professor, it comes up to my professor, and he basically stares at my work and looks at me a few times and whatever. And then what he decides to do is take my work and he starts ripping it, like literally physically ripping my art in front of the entire class.
Really?
And I died. I died. And the first time I've shared, this was over 20 years ago, but the first time I shared this, I was like in tears because I was so devastated in that moment of what he did that I didn't run out of the room and cry, but I was crying inside. And I literally went home that night and I was like, I don't know if this design thing's for me. I don't need this. I don't need this humiliation. Maybe I should change my majors. And I thought a long time about, like, seriously thinking about maybe I should switch into IT or computer related stuff. Like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Probably maybe I'm not good enough. And while that moment scarred me, and to even right now, when as I'm sharing, I feel that pain. But what it taught me was how we treat others really matter. And I'm like, we can metaphorically rip up people's stuff in their most vulnerable states in our organizations, and we have no idea we're doing this. I don't think he realized the impact that he had on me as a student. I don't think he does even to this day, because I hid it. I just hid it behind this barrier, but I was dead inside. Like I was just so hurt. And if we do this to people without realizing, we cause so much harm, and innovation can never happen because, I was like, how do I even show up again? I'm not going to come up with innovative ideas. I'm harmed. Like I'm psychologically harmed. I can't help with this, but it motivated me to be like, I do not ever want to create an environment like that for other people in my sphere of influence. So I think this goes back to the question you asked. I think there's a bottom up approach that we can take on an individual level to help others create a culture that we want. And we need psychological safety to innovate, because none of us, when we try new things, know if it's going to work or not. And we're in a vulnerable place to share it. We want to try it, but if we're all getting the frowny face professor that's going to literally rip up our stuff, I'm probably not going to even say anything, because that's terrible. Nobody wants to go through that. So we really need to protect the space for others. And I was glad I always wanted to do a TEDx, and I had the opportunity to do it, but I'm like, this is a topic I wanted to speak about because it. So I had this really negative story about this with my professor, but I also had a really amazing story with my boss when I worked in Atlanta, Georgia. And he, I decided that it was a great idea to redesign their innovation lab. And I was terrified to share this idea because I was this new consultant. They're like, making innovation better here, whatever. And I was like, I have this big idea, but I never designed a 30,000 square foot innovation center before. I didn't know what I was doing, but I had this idea I was mulling over. And I sat on it for months. I just said nothing to him. And one day I was like, they hired me to make innovation better. I should be at least suggesting this to him. So I went with him with a ton of fear. And, I suggested it to him, and he's like, I fully expected him to tell me no, because they actually had plans to redesign for the following year. But he actually looked at me and he was like, yeah, what do you got? Tell me more. And eventually he's like, let's present this to the VP. And I'm like, what? That's not the answer I was expecting. And long story short, I got the green light. I got to redesign this innovation center. And the reason why I share was because this is the most beautiful example of psychological safety to me, because he created space for me to explore, and if he had said no, that would be totally have been fine. But he gave me the opportunity to explore possibility with him. And because of that, I did something I never dreamed possible. And that's the dichotomy of which we create. We can be like the professor that we tear up things and cause a lot of harm, or we can help people do things they never thought possible. And the individual benefits, the team benefits, and the organization benefits from all this. So my long answer to your question there.
No, great. That's an amazing story. Yeah. That's
And so, I mean, and you sound very cognizant of, like you said, this formative experience made you realize that you never want to create that atmosphere, right? You always want
Yeah.
to have a safe, encouraging, yeah, more productive environment around you. And of course, sadly, the reality is that not a lot of people, well, I shouldn't say, I would say a majority of people probably don't feel like they're in a psychologically safe space.
Yeah.
And of course, I can take responsibility for myself and say, okay, how I respond to others' ideas makes a huge difference. But beyond that, is there anything else people can do to encourage or invite more safety in their environment rather than just building up and, encouraging other people's ideas?
Well, I think there's two ways for it. So as a designer, I know I have killed lots of ideas because of my own negative self-talk in my life. And one of the tipping points for me when I realized how bad this was my, I had just gotten married, I was designing things at home on the computer. And I remember this one time my wife was in my office with me and she just wanted to be around me. We just wanted to like be near each other. And so
Oh,
she's in there and I'm designing stuff, but I'm like, I was freaking out, panicking, like literally panicking. And I
because
was
she was
like,
in the room?
because she was in the room, like, and I was
Oh,
like, I'm like, are you looking at my screen? Like, what are you thinking about when I'm designing? And I'm like, I'm
Oh
freaking
yeah,
out.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
yeah.
eventually I was just like, you cannot be here right now. Like, I love you being around here, but can you
Yeah.
go out of the room and I'll just let you know when I'm done. And then you can come back in. And she I don't even think she was looking at my screen. She was just probably on her phone or whatever it was. And, I was like, I have something in here that's not good, like, why am
Oh
I
no, it's
panicking?
totally familiar. Of
Yeah, right.
course.
I was
Yeah.
panicking and I was like, oh man, I gotta deal with the self-talk that's going on. There's a narrative that's happening. And I realized that I probably kill more ideas myself even before it even leaves my brain. And I realized like I need to write these down, like what self-talk is actually happening and how do I address it, And I started realizing like a lot of times when I'm working on something creative and it again it's not visual, it can be business related. I'm always having these talks like, what a dumb idea. Oh, you're never gonna get this, Leo. Oh, we tried this, all this stuff. And I'm like, this is not a helpful narrative that I'm I'm having with myself, And so I call this like a limiting beliefs exercise where, I had to write down what all is going on in this noggin of mine and what is the actual reality to that, like hardcore reality. And I started writing some of these down. So for example, a lot of times I'll be like, oh, I'll never come up with a good idea. But what is the reality of that in my entire life? I may not get to a good idea immediately, but I know that I eventually will get one. It's just part of the process. Time is part of the process, right? So my
Yeah.
my counter to this crazy thought is like you always get to a good idea. All right. So like I've been able to kind of navigate these things doing this tool. And I think that's a way individually that we can start to utilize is to
Yeah.
hmm.
combat these thoughts that we have because otherwise they're running. I call them gremlins. They run around our head. It's very unhelpful and it just shuts
Oh
us
my
all
God.
down.
And it's
This
wild.
is a sorry, Morgan, go
I was just gonna say, because it's wild, because my gremlins sound a lot like your gremlins.
ahead. Yeah, yeah.
They're
I
friends.
have them exactly. I have them too. My wife's a graphic designer and art director, and so what you're describing that's literally what she goes through every time there's a project, and she will not always, but quite often, she, there's a deadline the next day, and then somewhere in the middle of the night she goes like, I can't do it anymore. I don't know anymore. I can't really do it. I'm not good at this. I can't do this.
Yeah.
And then, but she always comes up with an idea, and it always works. And in a way, what you kind of said, it's interesting. It triggered something because I thought, because I work with, I've been a creative director at the design firm, and this process of, I don't know, yeah, whatever this process is called, um, is very painful. But to me, it was always like that's supposed to happen. And actually, now
Right.
you're saying it, I'm thinking, oh, maybe not. Maybe it's not supposed to happen. Maybe there's an alternative to that. Maybe those gremlins, maybe um I
Hmm.
took them for granted. Like that's just how it works. You need to have that kind of that self-doubt and that, because it's also about, your kind of in my mind, it was part of a really great designer,
Mm,
that stress level, because it's also, I always related it to things like theater, for instance. If you're a really good actor, you can still be totally stressed. Actually, that energy actually makes you really good because because you're not like, oh, I can do this. You're not arrogant. You're every time you go on stage, you're still so nervous, but that is the energy that you need. So somehow I kind of felt that was part of that creative process. But in a way, the way you're saying it, I'm thinking, well, maybe there's sort of balancing,
Hmm.
some need for some balancing there.
And I'm thinking of the creative process overall, right? And there's always at some point like that squeeze moment, right? Where you feel like you're up against a wall and it's just, is anything, am I going to meet the deadline or am I going to make the client happy? Or just kind of this questioning everything
Mm.
moment. And that a lot of times is very closely tied to my gremlins. But I think you might still hit that squeeze moment, even if you don't have gremlins. Like, I don't think they have to be directly linked. I mean, I wouldn't know because I still have gremlins and I'm,
I mean, I do too.
I don't know. To me, it's such a normal process because I mean, when I was a creative director at this design firm, basically, at least I took it upon myself to make that my task is to keep account people away from the creative people. I literally closed the door on them when they would go like, "Do you have something to show the client?" We're like, "Go away! You're playing foosball. You're not. You're not even. You know." Go away, you're watching movies, you're doing computer games. Yes, go away, because I was like, no, that's part of the process. And then,
Yes.
we'll work until the middle of the night and then something will emerge because the playfulness and the playing, but it was also about the vulnerability of
Yes.
showing your work. It's the worst thing to show your sketch to someone who go like, what do you think? That's painful because it's vulnerable, because it's so personal, because creativity, design, it's something that comes from within you. It's not, it's part of you, right? So if you critique it, so it's interesting you talked about the critique part of it, but the critiquing it is critiquing you. So when
Yeah.
your professor ripped up your work, he ripped up you.
Yes. Yes, he did.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's weird that he didn't realize that because he must have done it many times, So
I hope
now
not, but maybe.
there must be like a club out there for you to kind of, all these damage to them. Isn't it crazy that he would, yeah, but how would he, so anyway, how then do you do sort of the, how do you then critique in a safe way? Because maybe,
Mm,
because he thought it was probably really bad. I don't know his intention. In his mind, maybe he had a good intention. He thought there was a way to teach you.
Yeah.
Probably he's a teacher.
maybe
Why?
maybe he saw you needed a push and he thought this do it.
Let's push him this way. And now he's like he looks at your LinkedIn. He says, "See, I was right. See, it's because of me. Kid, see what I did? It worked really well." No, but I mean, how do you critique someone in a
Mhm.
safe way and still, because even though you think this is terrible, this work is terrible,
I have
how do you tell?
I struggle with this as a teacher, so please give me everything.
Me
uh,
too. Me too.
wow. I mean, yeah, I think a couple of things. First of all, I wonder if, and I appreciate this conversation. I wonder if when we're anxious, there's this, like we talked about, this inflection point, this tipping point. If it's an excited nervousness, anxiousness energy that's positive. When I'm an introvert, I speak a lot on stages. Every single time before I go, before any kind of talk, I get the butterflies. It's like someone punched me in the gut, and I have the nerves, but it's because I care. And I
Right.
think there's part of that conversation that's that positive energy. We're excited and anxious and nervous. And I think if we didn't have that, it's because maybe I don't know. I think that's just part of that process. And I think when we have these negative gremlins telling us things that are not helpful, it stifles our creativity because it starts to shut down possibility, right, in our minds when you're like, oh, I can't do it anymore, like, oh, all this stuff. That negative self-talk doesn't do us good service. But I think
Mhm.
that positive energy does because we care, and the crunch time, they're playing games and they're trying to get to it. I mean, there's that excitement of what could be. But again, we don't know what we don't know. And so there's that one side of it. And I just have several thoughts on this. And then the second part of it, what's been really interesting for me, because I have a design background and I'm this innovation person, and I sometimes still fight with perfectionism of not wanting to show people too much, and not and holding on too maybe longer than I should, because I'm like, it's not perfect yet, it's not ready yet. But I have a innovation mindset as an innovation person, and that innovation lab that I redesigned, it was a prototype. It was a massive 30,000 square foot prototype, and I never wanted to show anybody it until it was perfectly done. And I realized at one point, I'm like, I literally am fighting my brain on this. It's like it's not perfect, so I can't be seen. But then I was like, but then I need to launch this thing. And I was fighting this, and I'm like, I need to see this and stop this perfectionistic talk in my mind, which wasn't serving me well, and say, this is a prototype. I have to, preach what I'm teaching others in this organization, but let's prototype. We need to try. It might fail. We won't learn unless we do it. And so I'm like, this is just a really massive prototype that is very visible in terms of the entire organization. But that mindset helped me get over that hump of keeping it too close or holding it too long, and so that we could learn and try. So that also came to my mind as well. And then I now, because I've been talking so much and dove into, I forget what you asked me, but we can talk about it again.
Something about how you can give feedback to somebody in a psychologically safe way. Because sometimes I mean, especially as a teacher, the students are learning, and sometimes there really are right ways and wrong ways to do things.
Yeah.
So it's not just my preference coming through. So how does that align
Yeah.
up with what you asked, Arne?
Yeah, so it's sort of the ripping up of your work. What would be a better scenario for someone who wants to teach you? Because assuming there was a lesson there, at least the intention was there was a lesson. So the professor wanted to show you something that your work was bad. Okay. In front of the class or not, but what would be a scenario where you would have been helped because he wanted to kind of critique your work?
Yeah.
What would be a safe way of doing it? So instead of because in a way your two examples, I mean, the amazing stories was sort of the innovation space that was sort of, yeah, go ahead. The professor was, this is really bad, but what if it's not go ahead, it's actually bad, but we're going to do it in a way that makes you grow and makes it a positive experience and give you confidence kind of to continue what you're doing, instead of kind of basically tearing you up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with conversation. And, I mean, I would have got business realities, right? If my boss was like, hey, we have redesigned plans for next year, budget's already been allocated, I would have been like, okay, yeah, I get that. But I think it comes down to, does the individual feel like their voice has been represented? Has it been acknowledged? Has it been heard? Has it been recognized? And I think if that's the case and they feel that way, then I mean, it takes openness on both sides and humility on both sides. But, if we can have a conversation or dialogue about it, and let's just say it is a no, and we talk about the why, and it's not you just shooting me down because you're shooting me down for whatever it is, but we talk about it. I think that creates an environment where we can dialogue, and then I'd be like, oh, you do recognize or at least hear me say this. Okay, I get it. Business reality is totally fine, right? I think it's that acknowledgement of the contribution, and what it looked like. Because, I worked at State Farm Innovation, and many of our ideas died on the vine, but we knew there was criteria, right? It had to pass certain things and all of that. So there was like a shared understanding of what was necessary, what was required. And I didn't know they looked at the idea, they made a business decision. I got that. So I think there needs to be an open dialogue on both ends, saying that I acknowledge what you're saying, we would love to do it, or we can't do it because of these reasons, this is what could have improved it. So there's this open back and forth between that. I find that the harm that we can cause to others is when we just start like, well, that's a dumb idea. Oh, why would we do that? Oh, we've tried that before. Like those aren't real, like that's no dialogue. It's just, I just feel shut down, right? The response is like it's cut off, the idea, whatever it is, and there's no opportunity to converse about it. I think that's maybe where things shift, is in that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So language is important, but it's also, I think people who critique other people, sometimes they're not really interested in helping someone grow or listening. Really,
Right.
they have their own self-doubt or their own gremlins in their head, and I think there's something going. It tells basically. I think there was something going on with the professor. It was more about him than it was about you. I think but it's so interesting because I'm so interested in those kind of moments where you're like, how can that be possible? How would anyone ever do that? And especially hearing your story, that you were really, it really hurt you as a
Yeah.
And
right?
probably also the other students, like
Of
they're
course.
all also going to come
Oh
to the
my
next
God.
class.
If you were in the class seeing that happen,
Yeah.
I would never show this guy my work.
Yeah, I mean,
You were
I
like, here my work, sir. Please don't.
I call that like a psychological scarring that
Yeah,
happens, and we
totally.
can learn them because of experiences directed to us, or we learn them socially, right? So
Of
the
course.
students in that class would be like, "Yeah, he's a scary professor. This is why." Like,
Yeah.
"Ugh, that's why he had a reputation." I mean, we all were kind of teetering on eggshells with that guy. I
Oh
mean, some of
God.
them maybe got him more than I did. I just, also as I felt like an imposter. So I had these other narratives that were going on in me, which of course, he
Yeah,
didn't
I
really.
heard that. So I have a question about that because you used that imposter syndrome, and you were out of your swim lane, and you used a couple of those words and sentences. So how? Because why did you? I mean, so to me, it's interesting that you also talk about you discover people's creativity where they might not be able to kind of show that, or you just you find other people are also out of their swim lane, if you will, right? So that's interesting. So why would you not be in your swim lane, first of all? Because if there's a swim lane that you feel you should be in and you're not there because you're out of your swim lane, why? Well, why? What's the kind of the driving force behind that you still want to do that? Because it does take a lot
Yeah.
of courage. I mean, you still continued, even with that professor and with feeling that you're kind of an imposter. And why continue doing that? Why not go into IT in the end?
I I think, well, so the longer narrative is when I was in elementary school. So we're talking about the personal side of Leo now. So
Yeah.
when I was in elementary school, I was really bad at fine art. Like I was legit. I'm not even trying to sugarcoat it. I could not draw. I wasn't good at like the paper mache and all the painting and all that. It was my worst class. And I was a very good student in elementary school. So art was my by far worst class. I always did terrible in it. So I had this narrative, I'm not an artist, I'm not an artist, that was in me. And when I went to art school, that was the same narrative that was running through me. So that's why I thought, my portfolio review. So when we applied, it was a very competitive process, and it was like 3 stages or something. The final one was you had to go to a portfolio interview. So I didn't even know what that was. I had to ask my art teacher friend, what is this portfolio thing and what do I do? Right. So she had to teach me. And I distinctly remember, everybody had these huge tables and they had their canvas, like they were laying them all out. I had a 8.5 11 binder with a CD in it, which because my portfolio was digital, because again, I don't have those artifacts. And so I already knew that I was very different from everybody else. And so all these narratives were running in me when I was in school, when I first started. And, I was like, these artists, they wear like berets and they have cool bags, they wear really nice clothes. And, and
After
then
class, yeah.
right. They know the art history. Like I had to study to do the entrance exam for art. Like I didn't know any of the history. So I was just like, there was just this running narrative in me that was like, you're not an artist. You're not, you pulled a fast one over them. And so it just all that kind of converged when he did that. And that narrative ran in me for a really long time, actually. I'd never called myself an artist until I think it was closer to my fourth year, my final year, when I was like, actually, I am an artist. But I had created an
Mm,
image in my mind of what an artist was.
mhm.
And it was the fine art. You can paint, you can draw. I actually took drawing class while I was in design school because I literally drew that bad. And I was with like elementary school students with this art teacher. Like I was learning the basics, right? And so I had to overcome this narrative in my mind. And I think we still have these narratives. I think culturally, like we think of art and creativity generally in the fine arts, right? But it's not that way. Art, and I realized artist wasn't that. It was the ability to create ideas and communicate ideas. That was really what I believed it was. And so I think the reason why I stayed was because I fell in love with this whole creative exploration of ideas. And, at that time it was visual, but now it's business, right? And it's still that same route of exploration and possibility, like we kind of started this conversation with.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and one of the things that's kind of come up, because you said it's about creating and communicating ideas,
Yeah.
is that you have to at first like imagine it to even create something, because you were talking about Star Trek in the beginning,
Right.
and now how many of these inventions are also more either A, already reality, or B, very close to reality if it's not already. And so what kind of things were you dreaming of, or like imagining, either when you were, yeah, an art student or as a kid?
I have always been a problem solver, so I feel pain just like everyone else, and I would always just create ideas on pain, but I didn't know what to do with them at the time. And the one that I always wished came to life, which did at one point but never did, was when you go to the grocery store and you're looking for something in the inner aisles, you have no idea where they are, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be cool if there was a GPS that was like, I'm looking for, I don't know, marshmallows. Okay, Leo, go to aisle G14 and section 3, and poof, there it is. Because like there's so much wasted time looking for stuff, right? Like I know where the produce is, but I'm like, how often are you wandering around aisles? And I remember when I was in the
All the
US, I
time.
think Myers grocery store had it for a short period of time, but that never, for whatever reason, never came to life. And I've always just had like, why are we experiencing it? There's a better way out there that we just haven't implemented, Like, why aren't we doing that? My mind is always thinking about that. And it's
Mhm.
whether it's a home problem, a work problem, traffic problem. I'm like, why haven't we done this, so I'm here in Toronto, for example, and I used to live in Atlanta, Georgia, like I said. And what was really interesting was they decided to revamp one of their freeway exits. So there was this main there's basically two that cross. There was a north south and an east west that crossed, and it was always really jammed out. And what they did there, so I moved home during all this construction that happened, and so I unfortunately I missed the benefit of it, but I go back to Atlanta very often now. And they completely reconfigured all the lanes where there's like express lanes and all sorts of stuff, and they just built over the highways. And I'm like, you know
Mhm.
that's genius, right? It makes sense. And they have lanes that if you're not getting off, highways slow down because we get off on ramps and we get on, and so they just have express lanes where you're not getting off for a while, go to the middle part. And in Toronto, to get downtown, we have this one major highway that runs north south, and there's only 3 lanes, but we also have a highway that cuts it. That place is always jammed, like 24/7. It's always jammed and slowed down. I'm like, why don't they build over it like they did here, like in Atlanta, Georgia? Like, why haven't they done that yet? So my brain's always thinking about these things. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, will it cost money? Sure. Will it take a lot of effort? Yes. But there are other ways to solve this other than letting this really clogged artery be like that all the time. And it would save people time. Like, why aren't we doing these things? So I'm always thinking about
So
like everything.
is it maybe, and so maybe that's not true, but it's because we have been interviewing a lot of people on this podcast, and creative, or all creatives,
Yeah.
and all of them would call themselves outsiders, or imposters, or
Mhm.
struggling with art, and calling themselves artists. But it also means often that they see things differently
Mm,
because they are kind of outsiders, or they feel that they've spent a long time not in their swim lane, basically.
mhm,
So they have another way of looking at things. They don't take things for granted because they've had to be problem solvers more than others, because they were confronted with problems that other people didn't have, because they just didn't fit into the system
mm.
that was provided to them. So is that maybe a way to describe sort of the way your brain works, that you see things where other people just go and stand in line and wait for the traffic to clear, and you're like, why? There's a solution to this. We can do it that way. Where, because often that's how I often feel like, doesn't
Yeah.
anybody else Why are we in traffic? I mean, listen, this is crazy, right? When you're in traffic, when there's like, I don't understand why people every day they would stand there every day. The system is broken. I don't understand that. Why do
Yeah.
we do this? And then but to be honest, I mean, sort of, you should answer the question, but I do want to add on one thing, because I did hear there was a research done um, when that people sometimes feel that they really actually like to be in traffic sometimes, because and taking a little longer to get home or go to work, because that's the only private time they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I can see that. I can see that.
like play my music, there's no one my kids are
Decompress.
not here.
Yeah.
My
Me
wife,
time. So me time.
it's a me time. It's true. Which then are like, oh, that's an interesting talk about jobs to be done, right? Anyway, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. w- so
What was the
there's
question?
no, I know the question. I know the question. There's one of my favorite innovation books is called The Innovator's DNA. And the authors of this book basically researched the world's greatest innovators. Steve Jobs was amongst this at the time. And they distilled what innovators do into 5 different characteristics. And the one that I love the most is referred to as associative thinking, which is basically being able to take ideas from different places and putting them together or connecting the dots. And I think what makes me effective as an innovator and what makes people effective as innovators is doing this principle, because we don't just look at a solution from one lens only. It's like we look at what are the other places in which we could, how might else we solve this using other technology, different techniques, other places, uh, other people in different fields, like all that. Like where in the world might have there been answers to this, and how might we pull them together to solve this? And I think probably that's where a lot of people that are, we'll just say, more disposed to innovation, they have this sort of lateral thinking. And I have a workshop on this, which I call Think Like an Innovator, which I did at South by Southwest this year. And it's this ability to lean into, hey, maybe birds have solved this and we can answer from them, or ants have a really good way about queuing, right? They have to get into the anthill. How might they do that, right? And so, what could we learn from them to discover a solution for this problem? And we don't allow ourselves to do, I like to say, different experiences or filling our minds with new information about seemingly unrelated things. But doing that makes us more powerful innovators, more creative people, because we go and do all these experiences. And when I was growing up as a kid, there was always this phrase that was Jack or Jill of all trades, master of none. And growing up, I thought that it was seen as this really negative thing, because it meant that you were interested in lots of stuff, but you weren't good at anything. And I always felt
Right.
bad like that, because I was very interested in everything. I'm like, oh, gymnastics is cool, Star Trek is cool, robots are cool, technology is cool, all these things. So I was really, music is, I was so interested in all of things, and I obviously couldn't learn. I didn't have that much time to learn everything I wanted to learn, but I always enjoyed learning all these different things. And when I entered into this innovation space, I realized that was my superpower. It wasn't this bad thing. It actually made me better at what I do, because I'm able to bridge all these different worlds together to solve problems. And not everybody feels the liberty to do that. We now get deep into one field and we're subject matter experts, which is great. But if we don't continue to learn from all other places, then we miss out, and we're not able to solve the problems as effectively as we could. So I designed a workshop to teach people how to do that, because I've been doing that practice for decades, and I was like, there's a secret to this, that I've discovered in my own journeys that now I teach people about. So I think that's something that's really important that we do.
Yeah. So in a way, the sort of not, so actually, yeah. So because in a way, although the language around this, like imposter syndrome and kind of, and not fitting in, or some people talk about being the misfit into something, and et cetera, et cetera. So because you mentioned words and language a little while ago, and I think sort of how we talk about this,
Mm.
right? I think that's so important, because in a way, we tend to kind of feel that you want to be part of a sort of, I also grew up with this idea, obviously, that you have to choose a profession, right? What
Right.
are you going to be? What do you want to be in the future? And it doesn't, if you go like, well, I like this and that, and like all these things, you feel like, oh, I have to choose, I have to choose, I have to choose. And yeah, and maybe some people do. I mean, if you want to become a brain surgeon, I mean, yeah, maybe you want to have a little bit more of a linear path towards
Right.
becoming a brain. I hope so.
Me too.
I hope they do. You're right. So, but then there's other people who actually, yeah, they are, yeah, but there's no, as if
Be-
the
To be
society
fair,
doesn't. Hmm?
to be fair, the innovative brain surgeons probably were also quite lateral
Well, there
thinkers.
you go. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So there must be a story there too, for sure, because someone has to kind of reinvent this, the techniques, and now especially with AI, and probably, if you're more open-minded and you have more, broader interest in things, and you probably are way ahead of the brain surgeon that is stuck in his or her way, probably. So I think that's always, but I'm just saying that, society doesn't, that we don't have the language for
Mhm.
it to, because you have to have a job, and a job is quite well defined, at least until you have the job, and then you go like, I have no clue what I'm supposed to be doing. Anyway, but there's something going on, and I think so. If you look at the sort of current situation and the future, with technology, with AI, and with the need for sort of innovators and creatives and collaborators, maybe that's even more important. People who can
Yeah.
actually listen to each other, work together, and collaborate. How do you see that? What do you see as a sort of a something that's going to happen in the future? Where are we going?
Yeah, I think in this whole age of AI and uh, all of this, I think what's exciting, at least from where I sit, is what makes us human is our ability to create and innovate. That's what I believe sets us apart from robots and things, right? I mean, yes, can it help augment? Sure. But what we do best as humans is the ability to dream of possibilities and to create and do things differently and all of that. I think that's what makes us really good at who we are. That's who we are. And we're now wondering, we see, right, the potential of job disruption and all this and all these different fields, and like what sets you apart? It's Arne, you said this earlier. It's our ability to think. We hire people for their brains, how they think, right? And I think there's a bigger use case or a bigger business case for why innovation thinking and mindset and creativity and how important it is. And we see this now, future of work, right? WC, the World Economic Forum for 2030 was like, if you look at the top 10 lists of skills that they've said, it to me, most of them are innovation and creativity related.
Yeah.
Problem solving, resilience, adaptability, creativity literally is a word, right? And all of these things, it's all what makes us human. But a lot of these skill sets, I don't think a lot of us have been taught this in our educations growing up. I am very fortunate to have gone through design school because we were taught problem solving. We were taught, ways to increase our creativity. And fortunately, I've been practicing this for all these decades since those times. But not everyone has had the ability or has poured into that as much as I have. And so, how do we start to release? They're not secrets. It's just that we're all in different disciplines. How do we release this to the masses? And LinkedIn actually just did a deep dive. They were looking at what are the top skills needed for I think it's for this year in the age in this it's like something called like this in the age in the realm of AI. What are the skills are needed? They just posted this like a week or two ago,
Oh, really? Cool.
and one I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor, which is another alter ego of mine. But on number 6 out of these like 15 skills, they had innovative thinking, which was really surprising to me. I was really happy to see that because I've never seen innovative thinking as a desired or needed skill set for the future until this particular post,
Mm.
like in that language specifically.
Right.
Um, fortunately, I actually have a course on that on LinkedIn. So they're like, check out Leo's
You're
course.
like,
I was like, cool, yes, please go check it out.
repost, repost,
Repost.
repost.
But I love that now I'm
Yeah.
seeing creativity rising up, innovation thinking rising up, problem solving rising up, adaptability, resilience, grit, communication, like all these soft skills are so needed in our world today. And I think the more we double down on all these as humans, like we can all learn all these different skills, and I like to say innovation and creativity is a teachable, learnable mindset and skill that anyone can learn, because we all learned how to read, for example. We were taught that. It's just that education wasn't part of our curriculum. And so now how do we bring that out to the world and share it with the masses so that we can all be better at what we do, right, as humans? And when we're all more creative and innovative, I think we'll be solving all these different problems that need to be solved with this ingenuity. And I'm sure AI will help us with that too. But at least we can double down on what makes us human.
Do you think AI is threatening? Because I think a lot of
That's where my mind
creatives,
was just going. Yeah.
yeah, because a lot of creatives feel threatened by AI, and because it looks like it can also just do all the design, and you
Yeah.
ask for, especially graphic designers, is a declining job I saw somewhere, because you just ask whatever AI you're using, can you create a logo for this, which to me sounds like when I long time ago when we were when I was doing that kind of design, it sounds like, oh, there's someone has a nephew of 12 who can also
Yeah.
can do the logo. And it's like, it's going to be crap because the company's not a logo anyway. So we're back to that conversation again.
Mhm.
But still, there's this fear, I think, for a lot of, not just designers, obviously, but since we're talking about creativity and design, that people might feel threatened because of it. And so, what are we as creatives, as people, as humans, sort of, you know, if compared to the almighty power of AI, which is going to be so smart and knows everything?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I've had to sort of wrestle with it myself. And
Mm.
I think when Gen AI and all that, maybe it wasn't 24, but 23, when it's starting to pick up, I was a bit squeamish about it myself. I was like wondering, how am I thinking about this? And for a long time, for me personally, I was like, I don't even want to look at it. I don't want to touch it. What what makes me human is creating. So why would I want to assign that responsibility to a robot? So I sort of just took a hard nose. I'm not looking at this for a while. And then I was at South by Southwest in 2024, and there was a writer who had a workshop on AI. And I was like, I shouldn't be like so close-minded, maybe just kind of explore a little bit, right? And I remember he had said, he's like, I'm a writer, and I have trained my robot, my AI system, to write more effectively and quicker than me. And it's in my tone of voice, and it sounds like me, and it says it can do it better than I can now. But then he was like, but then I don't get to do what I enjoy, which is writing. So why would I assign that task to this? But he said, but there's all these ways in which it can help accelerate some of the processes. And I do use AI now. So I'm a graphic designer. I use it to generate images sometimes when I don't want to go create it myself and I don't have a time, but I'm still sort of in the driver's seat. I'm like, I want it to be this. I type the thing, and it generates these things. And so I as a creative person, I never want to give it the responsibility of creativity. I still want to be in the driver's seat. But, I was always a resourceful designer. As you know, I wasn't an artist, so I didn't know how to draw. And when I was a student, I would leverage the internet. There's these vectors, images that other people have created that I used. But now I can ask AI to create it for me. So I'm like, it's not really that different. I was just sort of amalgamating all these resources from different places. And, there are there's a more administrative type things that we don't necessarily need to do. I like to write. And so I still write all my LinkedIn posts and newsletters. AI does not help me, but because I don't want to give it the joy of the writing away to it. But what I don't like doing is having to summarize what I just wrote and do the short post, right? And so I will now feed AI, hey, I just wrote this, whatever 1,000-word newsletter. Please summarize it for me. Because I would spend several hours writing it, and then I would still spend another hour summarizing it. And like that point is painful to me. I just don't enjoy that part. I'm like, I just wrote it. now I need a summary. So now I give a task like that to AI and be like, help me out. So I still want to be very much the driver's seat, but AI, I think, can help with some of these mundane tasks that perhaps we don't want to be spending our time on. It's excellent at analysis and insights and summaries. That do I really need to spend my time on that? Probably not. And now I can spend more time on the creative stuff that I want to spend on, which is fun.
And I think it's very interesting because two of the things that have come up for me is it about the process or is it about the outcome?
Yeah.
So for you, the analysis is just about the outcome. The process doesn't bring you in particular anything of value, right? But the process of writing, you do enjoy that.
Yeah.
And I read, it was a quote somewhere. It's like, why can't AI do the dishes and the laundry and leave the time for creating for us?
Yes.
But also, that's kind of also what we thought, like, well, maybe not what we were thinking, but we've moved away from agriculture to move into the cities, right? We've become a very urbanized world. And now we're finally realizing, oh, wait, there is so much beauty and value that comes to us by working in the earth with our hands. Right? And so it's become this luxury to return back to this thing. So maybe we think, yeah, well, I don't need to do the dishes, but maybe it's bringing us something we don't yet see the full value of. And so that's also a wild world to think that, okay, maybe in 100 years, it's going to be a luxury to have the time and space to do your dishes.
Oh, but it's going to be, but I totally agree with, and it's going to be way faster than 100 years. I think.
Probably.
Yeah, because it's going really quickly that, so I think a couple of things are, at least I think are happening, is that, first of all, you assume that most things you read and see on the internet are created with AI. So you go like, okay. And then there's things that you cannot replace with AI, or it makes no sense. I mean, listening to a podcast with AI talking to AI, it's so not interesting. Right? There's so many things that are so not interesting when they were created with AI. If you go to a theater or listening to music being played, that's so not interesting if it's not a human thing. Because
I was listening to a YouTube playlist for like background music jazz while I was working, and like 30 minutes in, I was like, this is not good. Like, what's happening? And I looked through the comments and people, it's like this AI crap. And I read the description and the whole thing was made by AI. So even though on the surface it looked like jazz music, you could feel it. It was wild.
well, and even if you can't, I mean, even if it gets better and you can't really feel it, and it can actually, somehow create music that you feel like, yeah, it's okay, because like I don't want to kind of dismiss pop music, but I can imagine that certain kind of pop music would be easier to kind of replicate, and it's kind of okay. Nobody cares. It's fine, and you can dance to it. And it's fine. I mean, so that's not a. I mean, that's not a. I don't really mind that too much, but the point is that if you listen to a person talk or read a book about someone's experiences and they have really happened, they matter more than when it's just imagined by a machine. It just doesn't resonate as much. I mean, we can kind of, sure, you can watch a movie that's created with AI and it's an animation movie, even though the characters and all the actors look perfect, like perfect people, and they're not real. You can look. We watch animation, and it can be created good story. It's fine. It can be entertaining, but the luxury part comes in when it's about a real person and they really, share lived experience, because AI does not have lived experience. They're not alive. They are made of things that are not alive. They never had a mother. They never lost someone. They never had an argument or a fight. They never bumped their little toe against whatever, and whatever. They never made any mistakes. They never did all these things. So it's just not as interesting. If you now learn that all paintings by Van Gogh and the whole story of Van Gogh is actually made up by AI, who cares about those paintings? He never cut off his ear. He never never wrote letters to his brother. He never had a, mental breakdown. It never happened. Then it's really not interesting on a deeper level. So I think the really personal things, the human things, are becoming more important. So I think our creativity and I think it's going to be elevated. I think that's so art created by people. I mean, the first work of art by a robot is interesting, but the second one is really less interesting. And the third one, who cares? No, why would we care? I mean, maybe it's nice to kind of have it on your wall because it's, whatever, right? So I think this is what's just going to stand out. Real people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that AI can help people with the dreaded blank page or the blank canvas when
Sure.
we're
Yeah.
just completely stuck. When
Yeah.
ideas aren't coming and you need an
Sure.
assist. And especially I'm a solopreneur, right? And
Mm.
if let's say you don't have a team you work with, I think it can be helpful to get
Yes.
ideas kickstarted. But even if it could do it better than me, I still would never want to give it the responsibility because then I don't get to be human. I don't get to
But it's not
create.
personal, and nobody
Yeah,
will,
yeah,
and we don't care what your AI tells us about you.
right,
No, because if it's not real, we care about your story. If the story of the professor ripping up your work was actually made up by AI, we don't care. We cared because it happened to you. It
right,
scarred you, and it is a story. AI will never have that experience. It will never happen to that, right? So there's an emotional difference there,
right.
which we are people. And there's this book called Being You, and he described it so well. He said, everything we are is made out of living things. Our cells are living, and there's actually even a whole kind of sort of a research done that says, probably your cells are even conscious to a certain level. On a
Mm.
certain level, we are living beings, right? We're made of life, and so you cannot have that. You can't replicate it with a machine that's made out of dead things because it's made out of dead things, so it's different. It's not
Right.
the same. And by our previous guest, the podcast, she recommended this book, The Atlas of AI. And
Mhm.
the first chapter is about smart hands. There's a horse, and the horse can solve all these riddles and can kind of do calculations and all that with its hooves. And people are like, whoa, this is amazing. It thinks like a person. It's like a person. It's almost like, so because it can do all these things, and it becomes world famous. And it travels the world, and people go like, wow, this horse can kind of calculate, and it does all these tricks. And it's like a small child, the way it thinks as a person. It's like a person, right? Thinking like a human. And then they do some deeper research and go like, wait a minute, because they couldn't see what happened. So because the person who guides the horse asks the horse a question to make a calculation or whatever, and the horse does it with the hooves or something. And then they started seeing what happens is that when the horse is, because it's a trick. So the horse is asked the question, and then the person who's guiding the horse, basically the facial expression changes when the horse is starting to kind of nudge towards the right answer, the right number. Not conscious, but just by raising an eyebrow, just unconscious, like smiling a little bit. Yeah, this you're doing. And then they started noticing that, and they started testing that, and yes, that's what happens. So that was sort of, they kind of started talking about the AI in a way is like that, right? We start thinking like, oh, it's like a person. It thinks like a human, right? But actually, something else is happening,
Mm,
and it's not human. We are human, and it's something else, right? Because the horse is also a horse, and it does things, and it has consciousness, but it's not a person.
yeah.
Sorry, I talked too much, but so this is like,
No, no, no.
it's such a big thing right
Yeah,
now,
it
right?
is. It is
So
for
it's
sure.
such a fascinating thing that is changing in the world that we live in right now, and especially as creatives. I think we have to have that conversation, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm really curious for them because of course we talk about AI becoming human, but I think we're also rapidly approaching where AI integrates with human and there start to become hybrid um,
Mm,
options. And because you were talking like
Now we're
Leo.
getting Star Trek. This is
This is
we're
Star
getting
Trek.
into Star
Yeah.
Trek right now.
The dark dimension, yeah. But I'm very curious about the critical thinking element of things, because we've also mm, we rely okay, GPS, for example, right? Some people rely on GPS so much they can't get across town without this map anymore.
Hmm.
Right? And of course, their brain has used that space maybe for other interesting things and thought processes. But is the critical thinking still a strength that we have as humans? And how is AI going to influence that? Because when we start to lose the critical thinking is when it's going to be a very slippery slope, I think.
Mm.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I hope not. I mean, solving problems is what makes us human too, right? And the ability to, yeah, I hope we don't ascribe away all the human things to these robots. And yeah, could it do it better? Probably at some point, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think, Morgan, you mentioned it's like the process, the joy of writing, the joy of creating, the joy of making art. All of that. Why would you give that to someone else? Like, if I like to write, why would I give you the responsibility of someone else writing? It doesn't even have to be a robot. It could be another human. I'm like, then I don't get to do it, right? Or I don't get to problem solve anymore. And I enjoy problem solving. I don't want to give that away. If something can help me with that, like to collaborate, I'm all for it. But I still want to be the driver of that narrative. And I think what makes us better humans in the future is doubling down on what makes us human, creating, problem solving, writing, innovative thinking, communication, storytelling, all those things. I think if we want to be relevant in the future, is double down now. If those aren't skill sets that we are really strong at, well, now's the time to level up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you.
That's good that you're me too. There are so many things that I'm yeah, it's such an interesting topic right now, so top of mind as well.
Yeah.
If you if is there something you look forward to in the future? Is there something that you go like, okay, this is, I really want to do this, or I'm about to do this, or something that you really,
Doesn't
really
have to be AI related. Yeah.
no, 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 no.
Like prefers personally, professionally, or just like
Yep.
technology.
Anything that comes to mind where you're like, I'm really looking forward to this.
I well, I on the work side of me, I would say I'm excited to bring more of the work that I'm doing, and Arne, I'm sure the work that you're doing is great to empower people to step into the skills or gifts that they have, whether we call that innovation or creativity or problem solving. But I feel like the more the people on this planet have this skill set disseminated, the better off we are. And so I'm thankful to be part of that narrative. I'm sure you are too. Coaching and training people, empowering people is like the greatest thing to me. I don't have kids, so any human that I touch that makes impact to them, it's like a little like a kid of mine that I've seen blossom or grow. And I don't think there's anything more rewarding to that to me. So I'm grateful to be part of this movement. And I think even in the discussion that we're having about AI, why it's so important now, even more so important now, that there are more people like us doing this type of work to empower people, creating safe environments, right? Things like that are necessary and critical. I'm a technology nerd. I love tech, so I'm always fascinated by what's coming. Autonomous vehicles at some point, I think will. I think all this
Mm.
technological advancements and all this tech will enable us to have more freedom and time to do what we do best, which is create and innovate. And I love to. I want to have a Jarvis, myself. I'm a Marvel fan, so Jarvis is Tony Stark's computer robot that's really smart. I would love to have one of those things that we can kick around ideas and all that stuff. I think that would be a lot of fun. So I think that world is not too far off for us. So
I think you can, I mean, basically it's like ChatGPT and just kind of on the speaker, right?
right, exactly.
It's like the same thing, right? I
We're
would like
getting
to
there.
have, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and you have the robot of the So this is sort of a depressed robot.
Mm.
I like to have one of those. They go like, here I am, a brain the size of a planet opening doors, so, because it makes me feel better.
I'm sure
I'm
you
like,
can give ChatGPT a persona. I'm like, be
yeah,
be a bit like Eeyore.
yeah, a little bit, it's like, oh my
Okay.
God, but now what? Now what do you want? And so, yeah, I like to have like little broken robots in the house.
Just like us.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, and on a personal, or was that also both personal and
That's
professional?
both for me. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's both for me.
Yeah, okay. That's really cool. Yeah. And Morgan, any last questions? Because
Oh,
we've
because
been
I wrote
talking for a long time.
been talking for a long time. I've been writing a lot of notes, and no, I guess maybe my last question is you talk about the power of kind of, what did you call it? Lateral thinking? No,
Associative thinking?
associative thinking. Thank you. You talk about associative thinking and how, you know, thinking of these or learning of these maybe things that don't seem immediately applicable,
Connected. Right.
right, are connected. So is there a new topic or something that you've been learning about lately,
A new,
or something you want to?
Yeah. I'm actually, I actually really love the topic of associative thinking because this is really random. So I started watching this show called High Potential. I
I
don't know
know
if you've
this
heard it.
one. Yes, I also watch it
Okay.
every Thursday. Yes.
Arne, do you know the show called High
No,
Potential?
no.
So it's basically about this woman who starts off, she was like a cleaner and she's ridiculously smart. She has an IQ of 160 and she ends up, long story short, she becomes a detective with the LAPD. And so
Ooh.
you basically, she's out there solving crimes and you follow her story. But why the show is really interesting, at least on the innovation side of me, is because what she's doing is associative thinking. It will be like she'll look at this obscure piece of rice and she's like, do you know that this obscure piece of rice is from Japan, and in Japan they make snow globes, and then blow, and she has all these narratives about everything you could think of. It's amusing, and every time the dots are connecting for it, it plays this particular song. It's like this kind of like neuroscience
Ah.
brain, and then this flashback of whatever she learned from this really strange place. And I love it because it's like we think all this random information is useless, but to me it's possibility, and it's creating opportunities for our brains to make new connections. So it's not really something I'm learning about, Morgan, but I'm like in episode 8 or 9 or something now on the show, and I'm like, I just love the show because of the way it shows how our brains connect things. And I don't think enough of us do the discipline of being like, this is a valuable use of time. This is not a waste of time that I'm learning about snow globes in Japan, but it's a use. It's you never know when the brain might use it. And I
Totally.
think that is a really interesting. I'm really fascinated by the show right now.
It's really I recommend people to watch an episode because it's exactly that. It's very brilliant, and you're like, how does, of course she's high IQ, right? So
Right,
she
right.
works at a speed I'll never know, but
Me too.
But yeah,
but it's
that.
really fascinating. Yeah.
Oh, I'll watch that. Okay, that sounds really nice.
It's a really good show. Yeah, it's
Cool.
amazing.
Like one time she knew a character was pregnant based on the chemicals she used to build a bomb. And her colleagues like, but how do you know that? She's like, because pregnant women never go near this common bomb building chemical. So she would have found an alternative. That's why I know she's pregnant.
It's like, what?
Okay. Okay, we'll watch it. We'll do a review next time. We'll go like, yeah. So where can we watch your TEDx talk?
Yeah, it's called From Fear to Flourishing: How Psychological Safety Fuels Innovation.
Cool.
That fear is my professor. Flourishing is my boss.
Cool.
And then I talk about a technique. I wanted to talk a lot more, but I only had less than 18 minutes. So
Yeah.
there's one technique I share with people, how they can start to nurture this for the people in their life. So they can find me there. My social media is at Everyone Can Innovate, because I believe everyone can innovate. So that's me. And I have a newsletter called Indisruptible, which is me musing on innovation, creativity, and Lego Serious Play. So if people can find me at beindisruptible.com and they can sign up for a free newsletter if they want to
Cool.
keep in touch.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I
Yeah,
really
thanks for
enjoyed
having me.
this talk. Really, really nice. Thanks for all the inspiration and yeah, it'll be lots to process.
Tips. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.